All right, so I'm gonna hop in here and steer for a bit and actually enter in a project, just so you guys can kind of see what that looks like. So let me get our screen up here. All right, Matt, can you see my screen now?
I can, yes.
All right, so I'm actually just gonna enter in a project as a user through RCD. So right now I'm logged in as myself, and I'm listed as the project steward for our district. So what that means is I have the final okay on when projects are entered. So anyone who has an account that's set up through the RCD project tracker within our district is allowed to enter projects, and they're considered proposals. And then those proposals are then reviewed by myself, whoever else is the project steward for that district. And then once they're approved, they can be posted as ongoing projects. Yes, so as we move through this, I'm just gonna point out a couple of things real quick. So the project tracker on my screen looks quite nice. We have all these really incredible photos that I think maybe Goldridge provided. They might look a little bit fuzzy or jagged on some of the web browsers, but if you check it out online, it actually looks really nice. All this stuff can be viewed by anybody at rcdprojects, I believe, .org. So I would definitely encourage you to check that out just to kind of get a feel for how this looks. But anyway, so I'm going to move through just adding a new project to the site and just show everybody what that kind of looks like. So if I go to add a project here, this is a nice new feature that has recently been added. So when we first started doing this, we were adding in all projects as if they were brand new. But now, as you can see, we can sort of do this either adding projects that are happening at the present time, or we can go and add projects that are already underway or things that RCDs have already completed. So this has sort of helped us to create a more robust system that allows us to track projects that we've done and we want to showcase to the public or to legislators or whoever else is interested. But I'm going to add just a brand new project as if we were just starting something for the first time here. So this has really been pretty easy to use, honestly. Right from the get-go, I've been able to jump in and enter projects pretty seamlessly. All these instructions are provided to either the project steward or whoever else in the district is providing the data for projects. So once all this stuff is reviewed, I can go right in and start proposing a new project. And so we're actually going to be looking at a specific one today that is a little bit different than the SLUES program Mandy was talking about. This is more of a mitigation restoration project. So I can go through all these categories and figure out what best fits. In this case, it's a riparian habitat restoration. And that's just one of the ways we can categorize this data and find it later as easy as possible. So this specific one is the Goose Creek Restoration Project. Google is already guessing what it is I'm entering. So I'm actually going to pull up our project data here real quick, just so that you guys can see what this looks like. I just didn't want to have you guys watch me type all this stuff up, as fun as that would be. So anyway, once all this data is in the system, we can set stewards for these projects and points of contact, which is really great, and start to get into how these things are funded, which is very helpful. In this case, this is semi-true data, but I'm just sort of making up some of the numbers just so you guys can see that these operating costs can be entered and changed and updated as you move through, depending on how projects develop. Sometimes things get more expensive or they don't cost as much as expected, whatever else. So in this case, I'm just going to sort of move through some general dates, just kind of placeholders here. All right, so this is kind of an interesting situation as well, where we have different layers of how we can view the locations of these projects, depending on how detailed projects are at the point of inception or creation. So as you can see, there's a no location option. So sometimes, projects don't necessarily happen in one specific area. They might be a district-wide program or an education campaign.
Brian, it sounds like your audio is kind of cutting out a little bit. I'm not sure if.
Hang on, let me see what our microphone situation is like here.
Good.
Am I coming through? Good?
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Just let me know if that sounds where we can call in as well if we need to. So the first layer of location data, we can just kind of zoom in and just get a general feel for where some of these projects are taking place. And so this is has a couple of different layers on there you can check out depending on how your project is set up. So, we can look at these in terms of watersheds. We can add aerial imagery to figure out where exactly these projects are located. So once you have a point selected in the system, this sort of provides just a general location. This is what's used on those overarching slides that Mandy covered before, where you can kind of see just generally where projects are taking place. So in this case, we are over in this area doing restoration work. So I'll just pick a point here just to sort of get us started. And that just serves as sort of a reference point. And then as we move through, we can get more specific about where this is taking place. So we have a couple options as we get into a detailed location. We can upload a geodatabase file if that's within district's capacity. In this case, I'm just going to zoom in on it and put a polygon in place here. There we go. So since I have a map in front of me, I can see exactly where our restoration project is taking place, and just sort of draw up the more specific version of where our restoration is. But sometimes NRCS can provide maps for districts or what have you to make this more specific. But that's sort of the general outline of our project, so you can get a really clear idea of where exactly projects taking place, what area of land we're working on for restoration or for education or whatever else. And then we sort of get into watersheds, which is a nice way to view some of this data as well, not in terms of percentage districts, but in terms of how watersheds are affected by this. So since this is a restoration project and we're fixing some area that was damaged by a golf course, we can see what watersheds were impacting by this, what areas we might be helping. So if I zoom out a little bit, we can see we're in the East Etiwanda Creek sub-watershed of the Santa Ana River. So I can select that here, and you can see that this project takes place well within this boundary. But if there are multiple watersheds affected, you can select multiple as well. All right, so this is another new feature that has come up pretty recently, which has been really useful in terms of tracking the other people who are involved. So in this case, we are the lead implementer of this as well as the associated RCD. But if there's a nonprofit involved or a federal agency or state agency, whoever is involved in this, we can list those people as well, and then quite easily look up and record what legislative districts we're in. And this data is then used to categorize things and find it later, so that all this stuff can be pulled pretty quickly in case people are wondering. So these the funder, partner, stakeholder tabs are also helpful for us because we can start to track who our partners are, who we're working with a lot, where are the funding sources for RCDs coming from. As Mandy said, they can vary quite a bit from district to district. So being able to categorize all this is really helpful. At this point, we have a set list of funders that's growing pretty rapidly, and the same with the partners and the stakeholders. If there's something that we need that's not listed, that's kind of where the quality control and admin support from either CARCD or from another RCD, whoever is running administration comes from. They have to help us sort of enter that data in. And then we have those funders, partners, and stakeholders that are listed for whenever we need them. All right. So this sort of gets into more of the nitty gritty. I'm not going to enter in all the project data just because there's quite a bit of it, but I'm going to run you through just one real quick so you can see. So in this case, since we're doing restoration of a riparian area, we might say that one of our performance measures that we're measuring is how much land have we restored. So if I go into there we go, stream corridor. So I can add these really simple metrics and start to look at. So in this case, we're adding our riparian buffer to stream corridor, and we can enter in the methods that we're using. And so we can really get really specific about what we're doing. So in this case, let's say we're planting something to stabilize the bank and prevent erosion, then we can, list exactly how much of that we're doing. We can store as many of these performance values as we want and update them over time to increase the total deliverables for the project and show what we're expecting to accomplish or what has already been accomplished as these projects sort of grow and evolve. And this can store data, anything from public outreach, how many people are involved in a volunteer event, through how many acres of habitat are restored, all the way through something like this, where we can record, plants that we've installed or ways that we're reducing fire potential, anything like that.
Hey, Brian?
Mm-hmm.
We have a question, actually. It's probably for something you just showed a little bit a second ago, but the question is, are you able to add multiple funders and amounts?
Yes. So here, I can go back to that real quick. So, and I'll just pull up a couple not real ones. So you can kind of see you can add multiple sources of funding right through here.
And what if a funder isn't on there?
Yes, and that's where we at this point are requiring administrative support. I can't enter in my own additional funders, partners, or stakeholders, but I can request someone be added through the administrators for the project tracker, and then those are then added to the list so I can use them again later, because often RCDs are working with the same partners on several different projects. Once they're in the system, they'll stay there and we can continue to reference them and go back to them.
And just to clarify, that's not Sitka has to add that. It's just the administrator, whoever the RCD folks have assigned that some of the things that they wanted to have central control, just so that we wouldn't get duplicate funder names and there's a consistency in the list.
Right.
The person asked kind of a further clarifying question. What about multiple funded components of a project? Mm-hmm. And she notes many funders fund separate components of a project.
Yes, good question. So I will get to that. So the next actually tab that I'm going to go to is expected funding. So here's where you can kind of get into who's funding what. So just as an example, let's say that a lot of the funding for this project is coming from our internal general fund at IERCD, but we also have a component that is going to be funded by the NRCS. So I can go and enter them as well. And they should be in here. Oh, yes, there they are. So through our cooperative agreements with NRCS, which is a pretty common tool used by RCDs, we can add them as well. And then we can list how much of the funding is being provided by each organization. So the annual operating cost of $5,000, let's say that half's coming from the district and half's coming from NRCS. We can enter those in.
And what about, I think the person might also be asking, like, what if the NRCS said we're just funding the cost of the vegetation, like the container stock, and then the IERCD is funding the irrigation system? Like, that actually might be a good suggestion if we can't already do that.
Yeah, so at least as far as I'm aware, we can't be that specific here in terms of what each of these organizations is paying for. I would think that the best way to explain that at this point would be this note section over here, just adding that information in. It won't be listed in this expected funding tab here, but you can make a note of it and that will be viewable later on. As we continue to develop this, that might be something that we need to add just to explain the budget breakdown of who is paying for what, and then what does that add up to, for sure.
Yeah.
I love the suggestion. That's something that would be pretty easy for us to add.
Yeah, that's a good one. I hadn't actually come up with that one before, but yeah, we could really break down this budget even farther and explain what services NRCS are providing and what parts of a project that they're funding versus what's being provided by an RCD. And you could really get a good picture of what suite of services each of the partners has in the project.
And kind of nice if it's a strict grant situation where it's very specific who is paying for what and what people can't pay for.
Right.
That's a very, whoever asked that question, that's a great suggestion.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. I like that a lot.
One thing you can do in the system is once this is all entered in, or you can pull up a view for just an organization or one of the organization's funding sources. So the structure is that an organization can have 0 to many funding sources.
Right.
When Brian searched for NRCS, you saw that there's 4 different funding sources there. Each funding source has its own kind of view and page in the system, so that the funder can go there and see what are they actually funding. And there's a description field, so they can specify what types of projects or what type of work the fund is intended to fund. And that's more globally. But the suggestion that came through the question, I think, is great, which is, given the context of a particular project, what is this funding source funding? And that could be easily added, but the top level view of the funding source is already there.
Right. So actually, I think that brings up a good point too, is sort of having all those organizations be able to explain, what this grant in general at a more global level funds is really helpful, because all that data can be pulled up pretty easily. And I'll cover that once I'm through entering this mostly fake project. So this, the last big part here is this project's themes area. So this is where we can list those categories that Mandy was showing us before. So we can sort of check these off and explain, how these projects fit into different categories, so that we can later pull them and, really get a good picture of all the different projects that might apply to climate change or education that an RCD is doing. So in the case of a restoration project, we'd probably say that we're working on healthy watersheds, maybe groundwater, and potentially endangered species, let's say. And then I can go in and start to just give a quick summary of what's going on in our project, why these are impacting. Let's say that we have least Bell's Vero as an endangered bird within this restoration area. We could explain that there and maybe refer people to more information. I think I'm getting other questions here.
Yeah, I think I want to make sure that we leave time for questions at the end. So that question that just came in, I will save to start off the Q&A section. How's that sound?
Sounds good. All right, so we're just going to pretend that nothing's affected, so you guys don't have to watch me type stuff.
Well, you'll need to select one and just type in any text.
Oh, that's right. Okay. Well, I'll just put in that we're dealing with least Bell's Vero. And so this is a pretty self-explanatory area, just entering in photos as you move through a project. So if I am, looking to add something, I can move through and pick something. Let's say that since this project is in theory a proposal for a new one, we would take before photos of what the site looks like now, and then we would explain who took the photo and when, why this is important. Choose the category for the timing, and indicate what it looks like before we started the project. And then as we start to actually implement this restoration project, we would take pictures of the crew coming in and planting riparian vegetation, or putting in a stream buffer, or whatever tasks are associated with this. And then at the end, we can add those after photos and really get a nice snapshot of how the project developed over time. And then the last section here is just notes. So in the meantime, if there are other pieces of information that are important for whatever reason, things that aren't easily entered at this point, they can be added there, just so that there's an easy place to hold on to that. Either if it's something that's kind of miscellaneous or something that needs to be explained in more detail, what have you, can be added here. So that's sort of a rundown of what the workflow looks like. I can submit this for review, and then it'll go into this mode here, where I can kind of see the summary of what the project looks like now. So as you can see, there's a nice map of where this project's located, what watersheds we're looking at, funding sources summary, everything that we just covered, and this sort of timeline up here of what stage of the project we're in. So as this starts to develop, I can change this from a proposal. Once it's approved by the project steward, which in this case is me, it'll become planning and design phase project. And then once we start this project, we would then be implementing it and move through the workflow like that. So that is a brief rundown of a project demo. Damon, do you want me to look at the sort of some of the project info and stuff like that, or leave it there?
I think we only have about 18 minutes left. I do want to leave time. I guess I would probably proceed, and if we have time, then we'll come back to this. How's that sound?
Sounds good.